Pawn to e4. Pawn to e5. Knight to f3. Knight to c6. Bishop to c4, Italian game. Knight to f6, attacking e4. Black allows the fried liver attack. Pawn to d3. Pawn to h6, restricting the c1 dragon. King to g1. Pawn to d6, solidifying the center and opening a window for the c8 dragon. The drawback is that the f8 bishop is kept behind the pawn chain, however it can develop via e7 or fianchetto on g7. The same setup was used with good results on board 3 of the same round. Pawn to c3, increasing the control of d4. Bishop to e7, preparing to castle short. Rook to e1, protecting e4 and preparing the break on d4. King to g8. Pawn to h3, restricting the c1 dragon and the f6 knight. Pawn to a6, getting ready to start a queenside expansion with b5. Bishop to b3. Rook to e8, vacating the f8 for the bishop and placing the rook on the center to exert pressure on the d-file. Pawn to d4. Bishop to f8. Knight to d2, planning to transfer the knight to the king side. Pawn to b5, grabbing space on the queen side. Knight to f1. Bishop to b7. The h3 pawn was cutting the sight of the dragon, therefore he moves to breathe fire on the long diagonal. However, white can also block that diagonal with pawn to d5. Knight to g3. Pawn to g6, restricting the g3 knight and preparing to fianchetto the dark squared bishop. The drawback is that this pawn push weakens the king's castle. Note that the g6 pawn is unprotected because f7 is pinned. Pawn to a4, hitting the head of the spear and threatening to open the f-file. Bishop to g7. Pawn to b5. After the exchange of rooks on the file, black gets a free queen-bishop battery. Pawn to b5. Rook to a8. Queen to e8. Queen to d3, centralizing the queen and hitting the b5 pawn. Knight to a5. The best defense is the attack. Bishop to c2. Bishop to a6, extraying white's queen and threatening to push the b pawn, who can quickly land on b3. Queen to d1. Bishop to b7. e4 is attacked thrice and defended thrice. However, the e8 rook is also looking through x-rays the e4 pawn. Bishop to d3. White find a tactical way of defending e4. Pawn to d4, opening the e-file for the rook. Bishop to b5. Rook to b8, moving the rook to the nearest open file and x-raying the b5 bishop. Knight to d4. Pawn to c5, pushing the horse back and preparing tricks with the discovered on the b-file. The drawback is that it weakens the d6 pawn. Knight to f3. Knight to e4. Knight to e4. Bishop to e4. That's the trick, the bishop captures, and at the same time the rook attacks b5. Queen to a4. Bishop to d5, threatening to attack the defender of the b5 bishop with bishop to b3. Note that white can't reply with pawn to c4, because it overloads his bishop, who's also defending the queen from the x-rays on the f-file. Bishop to f1, getting the bishop out of the dangerous b-file. Knight to b3. Queen to e8. Rook to a8. The position is still equal. The endgame will be decided by the asymmetry caused by the d6 and b2 pawns. Observe that white can quickly pressure d6 with his bishop and rook. Moreover, black's d5 bishop is still blocking the advance of the d5 pawn. Bishop to f4. Bishop to f8. Rook to d1. Bishop to e6. The d6 pawn is attacked twice. Can white grab the free pawn? Well, it turns out that the pawn is protected indirectly. If the white bishop takes on d6, then it aligns with the d1 rook, and black can take advantage of that by creating a pin with rook to d8. Observe that this trick works only because the d1 rook is not protected. Bishop to b5. The bishop dreams of controlling the long light square's diagonal. Pawn to g5. A good move. Where should the bishop go? The f4 bishop is the only one who can protect the b2 pawn, however it can't move back to b1, because then it gets pinned with rook to a1. Bishop to g3. Rook to b8, hitting the light square bishop and x-raying the b2 pawn. Bishop to e2, protecting the d1 rook to prevent tricks on the d-file. Now d6 needs to be protected. Rook to b6, Pawn to h4. Bishop to e7. Pawn to g5. Pawn to g5. Knight to d2. Proposing to swap knights. If black accepts the exchange, then white improves the position of his rook. Also from d2 the knight doesn't have good jumps, so it's better to decline the exchange. Knight to a5. The b2 pawn can't be protected. White will lose a pawn. Pawn to b4. Pawn to b4. Pawn to b4. Rook to b4. Black is a pawn up, but is not easy to advance the d6 pawn. The endgame is probably a draw with perfect play, however white is only 3 minutes on the clock and black 6 minutes. Anything can happen. Knight to f3. Preparing to block on d5. Pawn to d5. Rook to a1. Planning to activate the rook through the file. Rooks like to stop passed pawns by getting behind them. Knight to c4. Knight to d4. Bishop to c5 removing the blockade. Rook to a8. White is defending well. This is now a blitz game. Black has 1 minute and 12 seconds on the clock, while white only 34 seconds. King to g7. Knight to e6. Pawn to e6. White got the bishop here, but black got 2 connected passers. Rook to c8. Bishop to d4. Black has the advantage. White can attack the e6 pawn with bishop and rook, but black can defend with his king and rook. Bishop to g4. King to f6. Rook to e8. Rook to b1. A good move, forcing the king to move further from the centre before defending e6. King to h2. Rook to b6. The next step in black's plan is to play bishop to exchange dark squared bishops and push his passed pawns. Pawn to f4. Who solves all the problems? Felix the f-pawn. White has 2 ideas. First, prevent the exchange of bishops. And second, deflect the g-pawn and open the h4 d8 diagonal. Pawn to f4. Bishop to h4. White's last hope is to weave a checkmate or stalemate net around black's king. King to e5. Bishop to d8. Knight to e3 a blunder. Black wants to get 2 pieces for a rook, however this gives white some chances. It was simpler to just move the rook to c6. Perhaps black missed the intermediate check on c7. Bishop to c7. King to f6. Bishop to d8. King to e5. Bishop to c7 running around the bush to get some time on the clock. King to f6. Bishop to d8. King to g7 a brilliant move, sacrificing a pawn to keep the game going. The position is equal again, and both players have near 1 minute on the clock. Bishop to e6. Rook to b3, threatening to imprison white's king by cutting his escape route through the 3rd rank. King to h3, getting out of the cage before it is too late. Black's king is not very safe either. Both players are weaving a checkmate net. Rook to b1, threatening checkmate on h1. Rook to g8 a blunder, the amateur check. Surprisingly, the black king is safer on h7, the knight and bishop protects him from afar. King to h7. King to h4. Pawn to f3. White has run out of checks and the f-pawn is unstoppable. Pawn to f3. White grabbed the f-pawn but opened the g-file. Black will win a piece. Rook to h1. King to g5. Rook to g1. King to h5. Rook to g8. Bishop to g8. King to g8. Now is a matter of technique. White's last hope is to clear a way for his f-pawn, so he must prevent black's king to block on f7. King to g6. King to f8. Pawn to f4. King to e8. Bishop to g5. White's bishop is multitasking. He wants to help the advance of the f-pawn and stop black's d-pawn. King to d7. Pawn to f5. Knight to g4, stopping the advance of the f-pawn. Bishop to h4. Bishop to e5, getting out of the way of the d-pawn. King to h5. Knight to f6. King to g6. Pawn to d4. King to f7. Pawn to d3. Bishop to g5. Knight to e4. Bishop to h6. Bishop to f6. And white resigns. Black will clear the way for the d pawn by playing bishop to g5.